thank you so much for meeting with me here in Manchester.
No worries at all. Thank you for making the effort to travel to the UK.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Gareth Owen. I'm the sound designer for Come From Away all over the world.
So you studied underwater science at Plymouth University?
Plymouth University.
Plymouth, sorry.
Studied is probably a loose term. I attended the university for 3 years. I probably attended lectures about a tenth of the amount of time that I was supposed to. It became quite apparent quite quickly that underwater science was not going to be something that I was going to be spending the rest of my life doing. But I enjoyed being at university so much, and frankly I didn't have much, at least early on in my university career, I didn't have much of an idea what else I was going to do, so staying at university and having fun seemed like a good idea.
So how did you end up becoming a sound designer?
I mean, it wasn't an intentional choice. I guess it all goes back to my dad. My dad was a teacher, and he did lighting at the school that he taught at. And some of my earliest memories are sitting behind this big sound desk with big lighting desk with all these faders on it, and my dad up a ladder, sort of saying, "Okay, turn on number 7," and me kind of pushing the faders up there. And that was kind of my first experience of theatre. And then years later, and that was it really. And then years later, I was working in a nightclub, and the owner of the nightclub said to me, "Right, I was doing lighting in the nightclub, disco lighting and stuff." And the owner of the nightclub said to me, "Okay, so we're going to start doing live sound. We're going to start doing bands. Can you sort this out?" And I didn't have the first idea about live sound, but I went and bought a book, and they gave me a load of money, and I went out and bought a mixing desk and some speakers and microphones, and learnt to mix live bands in this tiny little nightclub in the middle of nowhere from a book. And luckily nobody else in the area knew what good sound was anyway, so I got away with it. I got away with just mixing these bands. They must have sounded, with hindsight, they must have sounded horrific. I mean, they must have sounded really, really bad, but nobody knew any better, so I got away with it. And then I was at university, and I was doing nightclub security at the University Students' Union, which is the place where all the students hang out. It's owned by the university, and it's like the student union, the students' nightclub. And I was doing security there, and there was a big band in, and they brought all their own sound gear in, and I got talking to the guy who came in with the sound, and I lied to him. I said I was doing a degree in acoustics. Plymouth University didn't even do a degree in acoustics. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm doing a degree in acoustics. I'd love to do some work experience." And he said, "Well, it's funny you should mention that. The company that I'm working for is back here in Plymouth in a couple of weeks' time, doing this massive concert in a field overlooking the sea. Why don't you contact them and see if you can get some work experience?" So I called this big sound company based up in the north of England, long way away, and lied again, so I was doing a degree in acoustics, and could I do work experience? And they said, "Yeah, sure, come along." So I ended up working on this gig, and really enjoyed it. Got on really well with everyone. The limited sound knowledge I had was enough to make me useful. And the next week I got a call saying, "Hey, do you want to come do some more work experience on another concert?" And so I went and did that, and I basically spent the whole of my summer doing summer festivals, doing all the big rock festivals in the UK, like Leeds and Reading and Glastonbury, these big outdoor rock festivals, for no money. But I was on a tour bus. I had backstage access all areas pass. I was going to these massive concerts and walking around backstage next to the likes of Bon Jovi and AC/DC and Metallica, and for a guy at university, barely, in my late teens, it was like just absolutely amazing. So eventually that turned into proper work, and I'm still at university at this point, so you can see why my university career was going down the tubes. And eventually I ended up going and doing lots of tours and big rock concerts working for this company up in the north of England called SSE. And So that went on, and I got to the point where I was mixing some really big bands and working with some really big artists. But I'd always been interested in theatre. I always had this interest in theatre. By this point, I completely dropped out of university, much to my parents' huge disgust. They were not happy about that. But they sort of realised that my personality, anything they said was going to change my mind anyway. So they put up with it. And then a German friend of mine who I was working with on a festival, who I'd done a few shows with, said to me, I'm mixing this West End musical at the moment, and I've been offered to go out on tour with a band called Thunder. It's like 6 months. Do you want to mix this West End musical for me? And it was musical in the loosest possible term. It was more like a concert. It was called Blues Brothers, but it was in the Whitehall Theatre, like right next to Downing Street in the West End. So it was like super prestigious theatre, if not a particularly prestigious or difficult show. So again, I just kind of went, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Not knowing anything about theatre, just kind of my innate bluster kind of thinking, it'll carry me through. So I moved to London. I didn't have a lot of money at this point, so I did a deal with the band on the Blues Brothers show that I could live in a tent in their garden. So I paid them like £25 a week, lived in a tent in their garden, and mixed this West End musical as head of sound, and got away with it. Actually ended up really enjoying it. I really enjoyed it for a number of reasons. I enjoyed it because I wasn't tired anymore. Like, I realised that I'd spent my whole rock and roll career just being tired. It was like not enough sleep, rubbish food, never enjoying it because I was tired all the time. And suddenly I was working this West End show where I had to be in at 5:30 at night. We were finished by 10, and I was able to go to the gym, and I was able to sleep. And suddenly I discovered that I remembered that I enjoyed sound engineering. And so this became the start of my theatre career. And I still did rock and roll, but I started doing more and more theatre, and went out on tour with various shows as head of sound, kind of completely bypassed the usual career ladder that people do in theatre when they start off as a radio mic tech and work their way up to the head of sound. Completely bypassed all of that. As far as the theatre sound community were concerned, I just kind of came out of nowhere, even though I'd been doing the worst, most horrible jobs in rock and roll and started, right from the bottom there. As far as the theatre community was concerned, I kind of came out of nowhere. And I did a number of tours as a sound operator, and then was offered work as a sound designer, and again said yes, even though with hindsight I really didn't know what I was doing. Again, I kind of pulled it off and got away with it. I really don't know how. And so I started calling myself a sound designer, and then I got a job working for a London-based rental company as a sound designer, working for them. Stayed with them for 3 or 4 years, and then set out on my own and set up my own company, just doing design for musicals, and that's how I became a sound designer.
So what exactly do you do as a sound designer?
So the job of a theatrical sound designer is to take responsibility for everything that everyone hears. So it's not just the sound that the audience hears, it's the sound of the cast here, it's the sound of the orchestra here, it's everything. And that starts from the very beginning of deciding what equipment you're going to use. It's deciding where that equipment's going to be put in the theatre, how it's going to be cabled up, how it's going to work, how it's going to be programmed, how the show is going to sound, how the sound effects are going to be, what reverbs we're going to use, what the sound of the flute coming out of the orchestra pit is going to sound like, what the sound of the leading lady singing the song on the stage is going to sound like, but also what those people are going to hear themselves. That's all my responsibility. Basically everything that anyone hears, the buck stops with me on that. That doesn't mean I do it all myself. I have a team of people around me who help me achieve that goal, But ultimately, if the leading lady isn't happy with her sound on stage, or the producer can't hear the words at the back of the balcony, buck stops with me, and that's all my problem.
Everybody has an opinion. What if producer thinks it's too quiet and director says that it's too loud?
Everybody does have an opinion, and the age-old saying, everyone has two jobs, their own and sound. And I can attest from personal experience that is quite true. I think a big part of my job is to take on board everybody's opinions, the opinions that make sense, the opinions that don't, distill them down into one cohesive sound picture as to how the show is going to be. And one of the hard bits about that is you obviously have your own opinions, you have your own ideas, and often they don't gel with what other creatives, producers, the people paying the money, what they want. And being able to suspend your ego and just take a step back and go, okay, yeah, look, this is not really what I think it should be, but clearly I'm wrong because everybody else thinks something different. I just need to take a step back from this and do what's right for the show. And that is something that's something that's hard to learn. And certainly in my early career, I really struggled with kind of like, this is what I think it should sound like. You're wrong, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. This is right. And learning to be able to just let go of that and go, okay, look, 3 people are telling me this bit's too loud, 3 people are telling me this bit's too quiet. I just need to let go of my own feelings on whether it's too loud, too quiet, and do what is right for the show. And I know an awful lot of really, really good sound designers who, over the decades, have fallen by the wayside, not because they weren't good sound engineers, but because they couldn't let go of their ego when it comes to dealing with other people's opinions and other people's thoughts on what something should sound like.
How do people evaluate sound design, for example, for the awards like Tony's?
The value of sound design in the musical theatre industry is tricky because a lot of people don't really understand what sound design is. To be honest, I'm not convinced my mum and dad really understand what sound design is, and they've been putting up with me doing it for 20 years. And that becomes even more of a problem when it comes to award ceremonies. Often people judging things like the Tonys and the Oliviers don't really understand what the difference is between good and bad sound design. And certainly that came to a head in recent years when the Tony Awards Committee actually decided to get rid of the Sound Design Award. The reason that they used was to say we don't know how to judge it. Luckily the Oliviers didn't follow in that respect. It's often the case that the show of the moment gets the Sound Design Award, not necessarily because it's the best sound design. I think people are getting better at judging what is good sound design. I think as the discipline of sound design becomes more mature and people understand it better, I think people are getting better at saying, oh yeah, that's a good sound design, that's a bad sound design, that's a mediocre sound design. I'd like to hope that's the case anyway. In the last, I guess it's probably been 10 or 15 years, people have begun to understand the discipline of sound design better, and that all-encompassing service is now less of a thing. Still happens, but it's less of a thing. People now tend to employ sound designers on the basis of who they want to work with, rather than just going to the company to provide a complete package solution. With regard to when sound design actually began to be taken seriously, I think Andrew Lloyd Webber has got to be pretty key in all of this. He was around, he was creating musicals at exactly the same time that amplification for musical theatre started to come into its own. It's a time when radio mics were becoming usable. Sound technology was getting to the point where it could actually deliver in a theatre space. And you can certainly look at the early generation of sound designers, Andrew Bruce, Martin Levan, Abe Jacob, these people who were right there at the beginning, and they really created the discipline of sound design. I mean, Martin Levan was the person who came up with the idea of putting microphones on people's heads. I mean, you know, every single musical theatre show in the world now puts microphones on people's heads. Up until Martin came up with that idea, everyone was doing it TV presenter style, clipping them onto costumes, clipping them onto ties. Martin came up with the idea of putting them on people's heads. But I think Martin, particularly, his collaboration with Andrew Lloyd Webber, where Andrew gave him the resources and the time to develop the discipline of sound design, I think that was a pretty pivotal moment in the early days of sound design. I then think that sound design stayed relatively static in what it was trying to achieve for quite a long time. For a long time there was this idea that sound in musical theatre should be invisible, so that the orchestra should come out of the orchestra pit, the sound of the cast should come from the stage, and that microphones and speakers were somehow cheating, and that all of that should be invisible. It shouldn't be there. It should all blend into the background. And the first time I really noticed anyone in a normal musical, forget about the rock and roll musicals, but in a normal musical, the first time I really felt like I saw somebody breaking these barriers was Mick Potter in his, I think it was 2005 production of Women in White in London. And for the first time, he ignored the idea that sound should be invisible and just worried about making it really good. So you sat in the orchestra seats in the stalls and you felt like you were enveloped by the orchestra. The orchestra was coming from all around you, but there was no pretense that it was coming from the orchestra pit. It was just this beautiful enveloping sound. And that was quite an eye-opener for me. That made me realise that we could do something better than what we were doing. And it really got me to thinking, and these days, being unapologetic about sound is really my USP, it's my unique selling point. I don't pretend that the shows aren't amplified, I don't pretend that we're not using sound equipment. I'm unapologetic about it, and my reasoning for doing that is that I feel like people's expectations when it comes to sound have moved on from the 80s and 90s. These days, everybody goes to the cinema, goes to the movie theatre, and they watch Inception, and the spaceship flies over and the floor shakes, and they go into battle and the timpanis roll, and the timpanis hit you in the chest, and the orchestra's soaring around you. You feel like you're in the middle of the string section. And it's gloriously cinematic. And people are used to that when they go to the movie theatre. They've got iPhones with Beats headphones, not the greatest of headphones admittedly, but a huge increase in sound quality from what they achieved in previous years. You get in your car and even the cheapest car has like 9 speakers in it. The expensive ones have 20 speakers in. You go to Target or Curry's and you can pick up a home cinema system for your front room for a couple of $100, which gives you full 5.1 surround sound in your front room. People's expectations of what sound is supposed to be have changed, but yet for a long time theatre clung to this idea that we should apologise for sound and sound shouldn't be a thing. And I try to completely ignore that, and I try to be cinematic in my sound design. I bring the sound out to the audience, I wrap the audience up in it, and I just want to make it sound as good as possible. And if that means that the audience see speakers on either side of the stage, or they see microphones, or if it means that the sound of the orchestra doesn't come out of the orchestra pit, but comes out of surround sound speakers all around, I think that's what audiences want these days. And certainly, since I started going down this route, it would appear that producers and directors, and particularly music people, agree with me on it. I've ended up in a position where I'm the first choice sound designer for a lot of the most prestigious musical theatre composers in the world. And as a result of that, and that's because they like the cinematic glory that I bring to their music. And I think it's the way of the future. I think that's how sound should be in theatre shows.
Your mixing desk caught fire during Act 1 of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dream. What happened?
Firstly, I should say I'm really impressed with your research. In Act 1 of the show, and suddenly the sound operator was like, I feel like I can smell smoke. Can anybody else smell smoke? And we're like, no, don't be stupid. It's coming in through the air vents, somebody smoking weed in the street outside, don't worry about it. And then he said, this desk's really not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And suddenly the whole desk crashed. Lights on, lights flashing all over the place. The red warning signs all over the mixing surface, and the whole sound system crashed. And we realised that when we had put the surround, cover around the back of the mixing desk, that part of it had fallen into one of the air vents on the back of the desk and blocked it up. And anyway, the whole thing overheated and it all died, and it was quite catastrophic actually. But I think the highlight, well, there was two saving graces to this. First saving grace is that Andrew Lloyd Webber was there the night before and not there that night, because if the desk had crashed with Andrew standing next to me, as he likes to do, talking all the way through the show and giving notes and giving ideas all the way through the show, as he likes to do, if the desk had crashed with him standing next to me, I'm not sure I'd still be on this planet. The second saving grace was that the producer and the director went on stage and did what I can only describe as a stand-up comedy routine. It took us about 11 minutes to fix the desk, and the whole show stop was about 20 minutes by the time we got everyone queued up and ready to go again. But for at least 10 minutes of this, the director and the producer did a full stand-up comedy routine on the stage, which to this day was one of the funniest experiences of my life. Despite the fact that the mixing desk was on fire in front of me, it was actually quite entertaining.
Does it happen often, like something so unpredictable, I guess, during the show itself?
Unpredictable things happen. That's why we do live sound. It's why we don't do movies or record albums in studios. It's the unpredictable nature of live sound that makes it so exciting. Things go wrong all the time. I mean, constantly. The whole sound, I mean, not just the sound, but the whole show, everything. Things are going wrong all the time. 99% of the time the audience don't notice. That's part of the excitement of it. From a sound system point of view, we try to build everything we possibly can to be redundant. So if a part of the sound system fails, another part takes over, and it's seamless and the audience don't notice. I mean, we double mic most of the principals on our shows. If you take Come From Away as a reference, all of the cast are wearing 2 radio mics. They're wearing 2 microphones glued together here, and on their backs they've got 2 radio mic transmitters. That is designed for redundancy. If they sweat out one of their microphones, if there's radio interference, if the transmitter stops working, we can instantly switch over to the backup. There might be a quarter of a second glitch, which an astute audience member might notice, but if we do it right, nobody notices at all. And that's just one example of the redundancy that we build into our shows. The show control computers are all dual redundant, the effects engines are all dual redundant. If the main system fails, you hit a button and the backup system takes over. Unfortunately, there are limits to how comprehensively you can back up your show and how elaborate your redundancy systems are. And the single point of failure, which is quite difficult to cover, is the central main brain mixing desk of the show. And we get around that by having an offline spare sitting in a box under the stage. The hope is that we never have to use it, but sometimes these things happen, and sometimes we do have problems that require mixing desks to be swapped in the middle of the show. I guess doing the number of shows that I've done, I've probably got more experience of it than most. But what I can say is that in my entire career, we've never lost a show because of equipment failure. At least in the sound department, I know it's happened in the past with things like automation failure. You know, if a piece of scenery gets jammed in a place where the show just can't hope to continue, we've lost shows in that respect, but we've never lost a show as a result of sound failure. We've done show stops, but we've never lost a show.
Speaking of Come From Away, I guess the fundamental difference between Come From Away on Broadway and the West End is the use of, hope I pronounce it correctly, binaural masking, like the so-called cocktail party effect technology. I was wondering how often like the sound design of a replica show kind of differs from the original because of the technology advancements.
So the sound design for Come From Away London is different to the sound design for Come From Away Broadway. And that is, as you correctly surmised, to do with the evolution of sound technology that's happened in the few years between Come From Away Broadway and Come From Away London. It's actually quite abnormal to evolve a show once the flagship production of it's being done. Usually what happens is you build up and build up and build up to Broadway, and everyone puts as much work as they possibly can into the Broadway production. The Broadway production is considered the metric by which all the future productions are replicated. In the case of the evolution of the sound design on Come From Away, there's this new technology called Soundscape, which is all about localizing the sound of the performers to the actual people on stage. And that technology had the potential to hugely benefit Come From Away, because Come From Away is so complicated, so many people delivering so many different lines all over the place. A lot of the direction and choreography is actually subtle flags to draw the audience's attention to who's speaking at any given time, because on the original production the sound was basically just I don't want to say one-dimensional, but very much just one wall of sound. So knowing who was speaking required visual cues to draw people's attention to it. And this is something that we always felt we could do better, but the technology didn't exist to make that work at the time. And then this new tech came along, and me and my team were the first people to jump on this. And in fact, currently today we have 6 productions around the world using this new technology. I believe other sound design teams, I think there's like 1 or 2 other people doing it. And Come From Away really benefited from it, like really benefited from it. So it was worth the effort and the energy to put into it to make it better for London. And I guess that to a degree shows the love that my team and the Come From Away creatives have for the production, that they're prepared to put in the time and the energy to almost completely redo the sound of the show from scratch for something that is supposedly not the flagship production. Actually, we like the sound of London so much, we keep discussing whether we should redo it for Broadway, but it would actually involve closing the show for a few days, and that is both financially and practically quite difficult to achieve.
I wanted to ask you about Spring Awakening. How did you help deaf actors stay in time, like to sing and act along with music?
Spring Awakening is a really interesting one. It really surprises me how many people bring up Spring Awakening in interviews. I actually did an hour-long interview with a student from Yale just a couple of weeks ago, and her primary interest was Spring Awakening and just these questions. To me, Spring Awakening was just, I don't want to say just another Broadway show, that makes me sound very flippant, but it was just another show. But yet the number of times it comes up in interviews, the number of times people bring it up and want to ask questions about Spring Awakening never ceases to surprise me. I guess the biggest challenge on Spring Awakening was keeping actors who can't hear in time with the orchestra and the other cast on stage. And We dealt with that. We dealt with that in three ways. One of them pretty normal, two of them slightly more innovative. So most shows have a conductor, and the conductor has a camera, and that camera is distributed around the theatre. So we're in lots of places on the stage and in lots of places backstage. You can see the conductor so that people can stay in time, people can follow the rhythm and follow the beat. So one of the things we did for Spring Awakening was we had more screens on stage than you might typically have on a normal musical. You had more screens on stage, so that almost wherever you looked, you could see a screen with the MD on. In the places where you couldn't see a screen with the MD on, we had a flashing light system, little tiny LEDs embedded into bits of the set, embedded into the floor, and that linked the tempo tracks that the conductor was using. So these made a series of red and green lights flash embedded in the floor by your feet, so that you could see in certain places around the stage what the tempo was and what beat you were on. So it would go green, 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 red, green, 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 red, so that you could see visually what bar and beat you were on. And the third thing we did, and probably the most successful thing in keeping everybody together, is that there is something called a butt kicker. And the butt kicker is a box that's designed to go on the bottom of a drummer's stool, and it's for use when you are working primarily on headphones. And as a result of that, you've got sound coming in from the headphones, but you don't get any physical sensation of the sound. And actually, for drummers, bass players, it's really helpful to be able to hear, to be able to feel the sound as well as hear it. And so we got these butt kicker boxes, and what we did is we bolted them onto the underside of the stage deck. So we did a grid of them under the stage floor, all bolted to the bottom of the stage, under the bottom of the deck. And then we fed the same tempo tracks that the conductor was using, we fed those into the butt kickers. So what that did is it vibrated the stage floor under the actor's feet in time with the tempo. So it was completely silent, because that's what butt kickers are, but you could feel the sound in your feet. You could feel the tempo in your feet. So the deaf actors could stay in time using a combination of visual aids and physical sensation through their feet.
How do you choose what show to work on? What are your priorities?
You know, often the way I decide how to work on a show is by what other creatives are already involved in it. I've definitely reached a point where I don't want to work with people I don't want to work with. So there are certain creatives that I just know are going to be really hard work and really difficult. Certain producers that I know are going to scrimp and save and not want to pay the proper money. Certain cast members that I know are just going to be a nightmare to work with. And I've reached a point now where I can just say, you know what, thank you for the offer, but I'm not available. The dates don't work. Whatever it is I need to say to graciously extract myself from the project. But I do often pick shows on the basis of who else is doing them. And that's twofold. One, you tend to find that if a whole load of good quality people decide to work on a production, there must be a reason for it. Secondly, this isn't a job in that you don't show up at 9 o'clock in the morning and go home at 5 o'clock at night. It becomes, while you're working on a new show, it becomes a life. You're in the theatre for 14, 15 hours at a time. You might be stuck in some town somewhere where you don't know anybody else. These people who you're working with become your adopted family for a very short period of time. And if you're going to spend all day, every day, locked up in a dark box with a load of people, surely it should be people that you like. Surely it should be people that you get to the end of the night, having been in the theatre for 15 hours, and want to go for a drink with. Surely it should be people that you get to your day off and you're like, hey, should we go see a movie tomorrow? I've been doing this too long and worked with too many people I don't like to keep doing it now that I have a choice in the matter.
How did you get involved in Come From Away?
The truthful answer is I very nearly didn't. It's a great example of what I was just talking about how you choose to work with people that you want to work with. So, Chris Ashley, the director of Come From Away, and Junkyard Dog, Randy and Sue, the producers of Come From Away, and Kenny, they had just done Memphis in London. And the composer of Memphis, David Bryan from Bon Jovi, was never happy with the rock and roll nature of the sound in New York. So he asked for alternative ideas for sound design when the show came to London. So he and Chris, David Bryan and Chris, interviewed various UK sound designers, of which I was one. And I walked in and David said, "I know you, don't I?" And I went, "Yeah, I used to mix Bon Jovi." And he went, "And you do theatre now?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've been doing theatre for ages." And he's like, he turns to Chris and went, "Well, this is the guy we need to do the show." And so I ended up doing Memphis in London, for which I got an Olivier award, and I got on very, very well with all of the people involved in it. And I found myself thinking that Randy and Sue and Kenny were some of the best producers I'd ever worked with. I mean, there's still a legendary story amongst my sound team about how Kenny walked up to the mixing desk after the first preview and dropped like £200 on the mixing desk in cash and said, "Guys, best fucking sound I ever heard. Go out, get everybody drinks. This is for the sound team. I want you guys to all go out and have drinks. You know, you really deserve it." And like nobody had ever done that before. And it's legendary. They still talk about the Memphis producer who gave them a load of cash to go out and get drunk because he was so happy. And of course producers do that all the time, but they do it like with open bars at press night parties. Nobody had ever just smacked a load of cash on the desk. Legendary. So then, straight after that, I was doing Hunchback of Notre Dame for Disney in La Jolla Playhouse, where Chris Ashley is the artistic director. So I went straight from having a really good time on Memphis to doing Hunchback in Chris's home theatre. And if I do say so myself, I think Hunchback is one of the best sounding shows I've ever done. You know, when people say to you, what's your greatest work? Hunchback for Disney, it's got to be right up there. So I was super proud of it. So my initial experience with Chris was working on Memphis, and we had a great time, and everyone was really happy with the show. And then straight after that, Chris came home and found me in his home theatre doing Hunchback. And I was really proud of the results, and so was everyone else was really happy. And so I finished doing Hunchback, and then a month or two later, I got a phone call. My agent got a phone call saying, "So you've been asked if you want to do a musical about 9/11. It's written by two people I've never heard of, and it starts in La Jolla, and they want you to be away from home for 6 weeks." I was like, a musical about 9/11 written by two people I've never heard of, you're absolutely having a laugh. There is no way I'm doing that. That sounds like a really, really bad idea. And then my agent said, "It's directed by Chris Ashley though." I was like, "Oh." He was like, "And it's produced by Junkyard Dog, so it's Randy and Sue and Kenny." I was like, "Really?" And they were like, "And it's choreographed by Kelly Devine." And I was like, "God, Kelly did Rock of Ages," which is like one of my favourite shows ever. It's like my biggest guilty pleasure. And they said, "Oh yeah, and Ian Eisendrath's doing the music." And I was like, "Oh, that's yeah. I don't know him, but I've heard a lot of good things about him." I was like, "You know what? Based on those people, I'll do the show." So I said yes, and I got there. I thought it was terrible. I really did. I thought it was so bad. The music was like just nothing I'd heard in theatre, but not in a good way. the orchestrations weren't finished, the arrangements weren't finished. There was some truly dreadful scripting moments, like a moment where two of the adult actors kneeled down on their shoes and shuffled around the stage pretending to be kids. And I was like, this is really bad. This is really bad. This is going to be 6 weeks of my life completely wasted. But I was in California and I was going surfing every morning, and I was with people who I enjoyed their company, so I just kind of got on with it. And I wasn't alone in thinking the show was bad. I mean, I think secretly most of the creative team thought it was really bad. And then we got to dress rehearsals, and a lot of things had sorted themselves out, a lot of things had got better. I was like, well, maybe it's not terrible. I mean, it's not dreadful. It's okay. I mean, it's not embarrassing at least. And then we put it in front of an audience. And suddenly, I realised how wrong I was. And I realised how good it was. And the audience were cheering, and the audience were clapping, and the audience were crying, and then they were cheering again, and they were crying. And I was like, is this an American thing? Is this because 9/11 means more to Americans than it does to Brits? What is this just an opening night audience? Are these people drunk? I mean, and I was like, this is actually much, much better than I thought it was going to be. And then we got another audience in, and we tweaked some more things, and we changed some more things, and we cut the adults shuffling around on their shoes, pretending to be kids. And we cut some more things, and we changed some more things, and we added a song, and we took a song away. We made characters better. And I went from thinking this is terrible to thinking, oh my God, this is absolutely brilliant. And now, whenever anyone says to me, oh, you're working on this show, or you're working on that show, what's it like? I always say, yeah, I can't tell you, and I'm not going to tell you, because I'm the person who thought Come From Away was rubbish. So, I'm not going to pass any judgment on whether or not this show or that show or this show that I'm working on is any good, because I was the one who thought Come From Away wouldn't see it, wouldn't leave La Jolla Playhouse. Admittedly, I changed my mind once we put it in front of an audience, but during tech and during rehearsals, I was like, this is a disaster.
Anything else? This was a great story. Have you been involved in any of the spin-off concerts, in Gander or anything like that?
Yes, me and my team did the concert production of Come From Away in the ice rink in Gander, and actually I couldn't be at the main production of it because it clashed with something else I was doing. But I did go to Gander for a site visit to visit this ice rink, which was actually quite emotional. I kind of walked into the ice rink and I was like, holy shit, this is. So it was. I had to sit down for a minute. It was quite emotional. We got to have we had lunch with Mayor Claude, who is just as interesting as you'd think he'd be based on the Come From Away script. And there was this fabulous moment where I got up early, because of course I was jet lagged, despite it having taken nearly 12 hours to get there. No, 12 hours? No, it took nearly 24 hours to get there. I was still quite jet lagged, so I got up quite early, and I took a walk outside. It was cold, ice and snow everywhere. I took a walk outside, and the only place I could obviously see for breakfast was Tim Hortons. So I walked into Tim Hortons and I said, hello, good morning, I'd like a Diet Coke and a donut, please. And the girl behind the counter said, you're English? And I said, yes, yeah, I'm English. And she said, oh, you must be the sound designer for Come From Away. And I was like, yeah, do you guys not get a lot of English people here? And she's like, we all knew you were coming. We all knew you were coming to be on the lookout for the English guy. We knew who you'd be. Gareth, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, actually, she said Garth. She said Garth, right? I was like, Gareth actually, but yeah, and they made me totally welcome. They sat me down, didn't pay for my donut or my Diet Coke, and I got and they were like piling croissants and bagels on me, and they wanted to know all about the show, and I ended up being surrounded by about 12, 15 people, all wanting to know about what the concert was going to be like, and I was like, I'm not sure I'm allowed to tell you. I don't know whether I'm allowed to be talking about this. But I ended up spending like 3 hours sitting in Tim Hortons just talking to the locals about Come From Away and the journey that brought us to Gander, but also I got the opportunity to ask them about how the story evolved originally. And again, it was really touching. It was really touching to realise that it was really touching to realise that the people of Gander really are as cool and friendly as you think they are from the Come From Away story. It's quite emotional.
Well, thank you very much.
No worries, thank you, and thank you for taking the time to travel here to do this interview.
My pleasure.